Hello everyone, this is Powell Ponder on Weather. In this update, I'm going to be updating my 2021 hurricane season forecast. So if you do like weather-related content, please subscribe to my channel as I will upload daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to it. We've got a lot to cover today. So what we're looking at here is the latest outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. And we've been in a predominantly what they call an ENSO neutral phase. Since April, you recall before that, we were in a La Nina, where that was predominantly through the winter months. And then we transitioned into an ENSO neutral since April. And we've been there ever since. But the latest guidance has us potentially moving forward back to a La Nina. So you can actually see the chart here. We are predominantly in an ENSO neutral, but going forward, we're trending towards back to a La Nina as we go into the fall months and as we hit the peak of hurricane season. If you recall last year, we trended and was classified into a La Nina back on September 10th, which is lined up to be, the peak hurricane season. And that's why predominantly September and October were a huge hyperactive 2 months there. And it's almost looking like it's trending that same way again as we move forward. So let me go over the latest guidance here. Here is the overall sea surface temperatures. These have definitely trended a little bit cooler out here in the equatorial Pacific. That's typically what you get when you have an ENSO neutral. You have a little bit more warmer waters out here, and as the system comes across, it's able to pick up some of that moisture from the Gulf and dump it into the south and southeast, and predominantly give them some very heavy rainfall, which they've seen over the last 3 months, which we'll go over some of those totals. But look at the ENSO. I mean, you can definitely see 0 is your neutral line, and back in the late April, we were a -3 deviation, and we have been trending up ever since, staying in that ENSO neutral. But just in the last couple of weeks now, we've seen a noticeable dip back down to potentially back to a La Nina again, eventually, possibly maybe even a couple weeks, going back into, which would put us back into what they call back-to-back La Nina years. So as we move forward, here's another index that I'm really concerned about, that we're going to be trending in a La Nina fairly quick, which is your SOI Index. This is your Southern Oscillation Index. This is basically the southern jet stream. And so the more active it is, the more probability of it trending to a wetter pattern for the south and southeast. And so that's what we've been predominantly seeing for parts of Texas and much of the southeast, which we've seen well above average anomalies. Back in June, you can definitely see we were predominantly in an ENSO neutral with a -3 deviation. We've been trending up ever since. And the more positive this number is, the more likely we are trending back into La Nina, which is the minimum standards is a +8. If you look back the last 3-month average, it's been April 0, May 3, June 0. That basically puts us into that ENSO neutral range, right? But look at the last 30-day average. We're all the way up to a 12 now, already essentially kind of surpassing what would classify us back into a La Nina. Typically they classify it once we get to a +8. We're a 5.74 on the 90-day moving average. So we're not that far off. I mean, we're literally a couple of months away. Now, the difference with that would be going forward, like I mentioned last year, we hit it September the 10th, and all the trends look like we could possibly hit it maybe 1 or 2 weeks before that, which would be putting us into a little bit more prime time of hurricane season. And so that's why I'm expecting things to start really ramping up. You typically have a lot less shear in the Atlantic Basin. And as these systems come across, you'll have a lot more rising motion air, a little bit more susceptible for thunderstorms start to rise in that particular atmosphere. But man, look at the trend, what's happening when we transition into an ENSO neutral, essentially in April. So for the last 3 months, I mean, here's your departures from average. And man, look at the chart down here in the purple. These are depicting 20 inches above average right along the coast. That's indicative of that ENSO neutral picking up those warmer waters of the Pacific, and able to take advantage of these active, higher sea surface temperatures in the Gulf and dump it over the coastal regions of the U.S. and eventually filtering in a little bit further inland now, which what you're seeing into the Ohio Valley and parts of the Northeast as well, and not just off the coast. So we're definitely seeing a transition, and it looks like we're going back into La Nina, which hypothetically would start drying these systems out as they progress from west to east, and to put a lot of these areas into a little bit more drier pattern. But as we move forward, a lot less shear in the Atlantic Basin as well. So, but for the next 2 weeks, I mean, it's going to be quiet. It has been quiet. It's going to be predominantly quiet. We're not into an active phase in what they call the Mann-Julian oscillation. We'll go over that here in a little bit. But for the next 2 weeks, I'm not expecting anything much of all in the Atlantic Basin as far as the tropical origins to develop all the way through essentially the 1st of August. And if we take a look at the GFS model as far as the precipitation goes, you can definitely see that as well. We have an active African coast, but once these come off, there's a lot of Saharan dust that's typically prevalent this time of year in June and July. And a lot of these red depictions, a lot of this would be sinking air to squash this atmosphere down in some drier air. So it's going to be a lot very difficult for tropical storm development in this type of environment, at least for the next 2 weeks. So as we move forward, things do start to change. Okay, let's take a look at what they call the vertical velocity index. And so this red is depicted on what they call sinking air. As thunderstorms start to rise, they get squashed from the upper levels, and it's very difficult for thunderstorms to transition into any tropical type of entity and that type of environment. But once you get into the green area, this is a chart from July the 26th to August the 2nd, and you see right now we've got Felicia, we got Guillermo, and we have actually possibly another feature. This is the Pacific Ocean, and that's where it's active right now. That's where a lot of the enhanced phase is what they call upward rising motion air is. But that trend that goes goes eastbound, and that will trend as we go into that August 9th and August 16th timeframe. That green area will be over the Atlantic Basin then, and that will give the capability of, I do expect, more tropical activity to start coming to fruition. And that time frame, it'll be a lot easier. And you can see a lot of the Atlantic Basin, the Caribbean, and much of the Gulf is covered in enhanced upward rising motion air. And taking a look the week beyond that, I mean, this is the shear index, the bulk shear index. There ain't nothing to speak of. I mean, this is from August 18th to August 25th. So we've got a lot of upward rising motion air. We've got a lot less shear in the atmosphere. And possibly, we're probably going to be classified into a La Nina by then, depicting on this lot less shear in the Atlantic. So I do feel this is probably a prime time zone. We could see a lot of tropical activity in the month of August, and especially as we trend towards the second half of August. Now, one of the things I look at, one of the elements that I look at to basically predict some of these storms that could be in and around our area, which is the Mann-Julian oscillation. And so which is referred to as the MJO. It's basically, this is the equator, and this is basically running in the Indian Ocean, going over the Pacific, going into the Atlantic side. So it's essentially, it's an eastward moving tropical cyclone, tropical rainfall along the equator. And essentially when it's in your area, when it's in an enhanced phase, it's a little bit more susceptible to have those cyclones in your area. But once what we're experiencing now with that suppressed air, or what they call sinking air, is what we're in now. It's a lot harder for thunderstorms to start to rise in that particular atmosphere. If you look at the chart and what these it's consistent of 8 different phases. And if you remember Elsa back in July the 6th, it made landfall in Florida. We were in what they call MJO phase 2. So that is the most active phase in the Mann-Julian oscillation. You can see a lot of these oranges depicting here That essentially shows that the atmosphere is very capable of that upward rising motion air, pretty much the entire Atlantic Basin, the Gulf Coast, and the East Coast. So it's pretty easy for tropical storms to form in this type of environment and last like it did all the way from the Cape Verde season through Jamaica, through the Gulf of Mexico, and all the way up the East Coast as well. But you can see now that we've trended back towards phase 4. A lot of that blue area in phase 4, that's a lot of sinking air, right? That's a lot of sinking air. It's very difficult for thunderstorms to rise in that atmosphere. Then it transitions into phase 6. That's predominantly what we're going into next week. But then it will go into phase 8. You start to see a lot of those oranges developing back into the Gulf of Mexico, along up the East Coast as well, parts of it into the Caribbean. So essentially 8, 1, 2, and 3 are your most active phases of the Man and Julie oscillation. I definitely feel like once we go into that August 9th frame, basically towards the end of the month, especially that second half of the month, we'll be into phase 2 and 3. That's a little bit more susceptible. So I do feel things are going to start ramping up in a big way as we transition into that time frame. So one of the things I look at this year is as far as like a steering current, as these waves come off the African coast, here's what they call the Bermuda High, and it's going to act like what they call a steering wheel. And so the combination of the placement of this Bermuda High, and you notice these ridges of high pressure here lately, predominantly all summer, we've been getting a lot of the warmer temperatures well to the north in Canada, and a lot of the cooler temperatures down south into the southern regions and the southeast. That placement of the ridge is a little bit more capable when storms come off the African coast for them to progress westbound and be closer in towards the United States, versus essentially maybe turning out to sea when we don't have these two mechanisms in place over Bermuda and over the over the U.S. coastline, or that ridge of high pressure. But what we've been seeing this year is definitely concerning. Is off the African coast is where all these things start. And this is what they call the monsoon, okay? And this is a graphic showing the precipitation anomalies for Africa for June and July, okay? And so down here, you can definitely see anything in green is your above average precipitation. Once you go into blue, that is your well above average precipitation. But notice the difference. Notice how far south it is this year. It's basically 10 north. That is extremely far south. So as this progresses and moves off the coast of Africa, it's a lot less likely for these waves to get picked up and go out to sea and be categorized as a fish storm, with that combination of that ridge over the United States and the Bermuda High that will help steer those waves a lot more likelihood than normal years towards the Caribbean and towards the United States. So let's look at the satellite right now. Okay, so you can definitely see these storms progressing well south. Okay, and so here's essentially right now it's clear. You have a cool MDR region with a lot of that Saharan dust. It's off here. It's pretty dry, but a lot of these waves will continue moving across. And once we get into a little bit more active MJO phase with a lot of upward rising motion air, yeah, all these waves have a potential to possibly form into some sort of tropical type cyclone as they move across. And once they get in the Caribbean, again, these will help the ridge, but the combination between the ridge and the Bermuda High will have these opportunities, because a lot of these waves, they come off every 2 or 3 days. And so not every single one's going to form, obviously, but it's a lot more likely for these to form as they move forward. Now let's take a look at the temperature anomalies from the latest guidance from the Climate Prediction Center. And this is the month of August, right? And so this is what they project to continue, that they basically continue that ridge in the northwest. But we're starting to see a trend. Even right now, that ridge is starting to go towards more of the interior regions, and eventually that will traverse across as well. And so there's a little bit more highly likelihood that ridge is going to be well to the north again, with the predominantly southern regions a little bit cooler than average. And you can see the placement of the precipitation, essentially from Texas all the way up to the East Coast. So wherever you see higher precipitation anomalies, that's where you see a little bit more highly likelihood of tropical storms type landfall in that type of environment. And we've seen well above average rainfall off the coast, and it's a known fact in July when you have well above average rains in July, it definitely tends you to be a little bit more susceptible of hurricane landfalls later on the season and hurricane season. So yeah, as we move forward, going through that August, that 3-month time span, that August, September, and October time span, it has the ridge continue to possibly shift, now setting up maybe towards over the East Coast region with, again, a lot of the precipitation anomalies, again, from the south to the southeast. Now this would be trending. Now this would be going forward, if we are going to be going into the La Nina, this kind of lines up. So unfortunately, that would put more dry weather for California. Unfortunately, that would open the door for the Northwest to being back the atmospheric river back in those regions into Washington and Oregon and Northern California. As this traverses across, it would eventually probably more or less dry out Texas as we go deeper into September and October and have more of the placement of the storms by then into more or less the southeast coast. Because one thing as we go into September and especially in October for Texas standards is you're transitioning closer into fall, and hurricanes don't like cold weather. And so typically we have a saying in Texas, once the first fall front of the year puts Texas in the clear, and basically for my standards that would have to clear the coast of the Texas coastline. So once we get that fall front basically clearing the Texas coastline of Houston, then that basically is a lot less likelihood for Texas to hit by a tropical storm in that type of environment. So if they were going to get hit, based on my standards, it would probably be in around August or September timeframe, and a lot less likely in October. So this is a chart back from 1851. That's typically, we can go all the way back in that analog year. They've been tracking storms, and that's where they have data all the way back then. So you see hurricanes making landfalls in the United States, predominantly it ramps up as you go into August and September, and September is your peak season, essentially September the 10th. So this time frame, which is essentially 62% of the season, is a lot more susceptible for hurricanes making landfall in the United States. And basically where we're at right now, we're here. We got 94% of the season left. So we're literally just getting started. We're 5 names in, so we have a lot more to go. And this goes all the way in through the end of November. And yeah, if we are typically going into a La Nina, again, that would put us back into a little bit more favorable phase, a lot less shearing in the Atlantic like we saw last year. And yes, that would be trending towards an enhancement in tropical storm activity as we go deeper into September and especially into October like we did last year. So I do feel this is going to be a long season again, with storms lasting all the way through October, getting into November as well, with this long season ahead with the La Nina building. And one of the things it's got to take advantage of, not just the warm sea surface temperatures, but deep ocean water. So as these systems come across the Caribbean, that's what we saw in October when we saw Zeta and Eta and Beta taking advantage of these deep ocean currents, and that's why these things were be able to explode in the Caribbean like they did. So there's a lot of warmer waters deep down in the ocean still, and so it's just waiting for a tropical system to be crossing that region as you go deeper into hurricane season. So yes, that is just another factor why I do feel like we're going to have a pretty active and hyper season. So one of the things that's really concerning and is really eye-opening is taking a look at this. This is the average from August, September, October timeframe of the latest 500 millibar anomalies. And if you take it from these trusted models of the European model, the UK Met, the CMC, the JMA, the CFSV2, all these models combined, you come up with this formula, and this is deeply concerning. They basically have a ridge developing over the Northeast, and a lot of that would again steer these tropical features towards the United States a lot more likely in that time frame. So that is just another parameter that we're looking at to be another active season. And another thing that's concerning, so if you go back and look from basically the analog years from 1870 all the way to 2015 and plug in the parameters where we are now. So we're essentially in an enso neutral, correct? We're trending towards a La Nina. We have a much cooler main development region, or what they call the MDR region. That's where the Saharan dust is right now. It's pretty cool right now in the month of July. And I showed you we have a very wet African coastline. So if you put all those parameters in play and you look at all the analog years from 1870 to 2015, you come up with this. The year 1870, 1872, 1894, 1916, 1917, 1924, 1938, 1974, and 2008. Now look at the graph. This is pretty concerning, guys. Now what this is showing is anything that's essentially blue to all the deep purple, that's a negative barometric pressure. Okay, so basically, the darker the color shaded blue, essentially the lower the pressure. The lower the pressures over the tropics, possibly the bigger the storm may be. So you can definitely see an active during that time frame of August, September, October, the 62% of the peak hurricane season coming off the African coast of this main development region continue westbound based on the Bermuda High and the ridge of high pressure. This will continue into the Caribbean and really start to expand, and some of these deep purples start to show up near Jamaica, near the Cayman Islands, near Florida, and then putting Texas all the way up the coast. And even more concerning this year would put more of the East Coast in the play with the system. But predominantly Florida is a pretty good high target this year for tropical storm landfalls in the United States. So yeah, going forward in these deep purples, this is pretty concerning, showing an average of these lower barometric pressures in the Caribbean based on a lot of these parameters that we have currently right now. And what's troubling, if you just single out October, right? If you just single out October and we put all this into play, that we start to see some of the deepest purples show up. Now, if the trend continues, we would be in prime time hurricane season. We would be deep into the La Nina by then. We would probably be, based on the MJO going around every 46 days, cycling through, essentially repeating itself every 46 days, we would predominantly be into MJO phase 2 by the time we get into first week of October as well. So it's deeply concerning. October could be another very active month for the United States, going forward. So, hey, I know this was a lot to cover. Okay, so I definitely know this was a lot to cover, but I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely leave your comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update where I protect you before and after the storm.